So we're going to spend the rest of the lecture looking at the idea of nesting loops or nested loops. So it's one loop inside another. It's really common, because loops are used in all kinds of programs, it's really common to have a loop nested inside another. So for example here, if you think of a game, while the game is running, for each character, update the character position. Okay, so you've got to have one loop that's controlling the game and the other one that's moving the characters around. We're obviously not quite up to the stage of writing games at the moment, so we're going to look at some simple examples which are going to generate text-based shapes, so a square of stars or a rectangle of stars. But the principle is to understand the idea of having one loop inside another, not particularly to generate shapes. You know, the idea is generic, that we can have a loop inside another loop. You can have even a loop inside a loop inside a loop. Okay, so let's first look at an example where this doesn't happen. So this is a fixed for loop, so it generates fixed rows of stars. It doesn't use nested loops. Imagine you just want to draw a rectangle of stars, and the user controls how many rows there are, but the number of stars in each row is fixed at 5. So the number of columns is fixed at 5. And if you say 3 rows, then you get 3 rows of 5 stars. And if you say 5, you get 5 rows of 5. And if you say 7, you get 7 rows of 5. So the code for that, we just need a for loop to print out rows of stars. So we ask the user how many rows they want. For the counter in whatever that size is, so if they've said 7, then that would be, the counter would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We just print out 5 stars. Okay, so size controls the number of rows, and then the number of columns is fixed at 5. Okay, well that's fine, but we want a square. Let's imagine we want a square where we have 5 rows of 5 stars each, or 7 rows of 7, or 3 rows of 3. We're going to have to do something a bit more advanced than that, because this one is only printing out 5 each time. If we want to have 3 rows of 3, this bit in the middle in the code here, this line of code can't print out 5. It's got to print out 3. Okay, so if we want a square, we've got to match the number of rows and columns. And well, how do we do that? Well, we know how to produce a row of stars whose length is dependent on what the user has typed in. We've done that right at the beginning of the lecture. We've produced plenty of rows of stars where the user tells us how many they want. So we just have to replace that line there, the print 5 stars out, with something like this set of lines here. So for counter and range n stars, output starts off with nothing in it, and then each time around the loop we add another star in it. So we're taking that this simple print statement and replacing it with a loop. Okay, so the idea is then, if we started off with a loop that just had a print statement in it, we now replace that print statement with another loop, and now we've ended up by default with a nested loop. We've got a for loop that loops over the number of rows, and then inside that for loop is another for loop that loops over the number of columns. And each time we go around the outer loop, this row loop, we get another row, and each time we go around the inner loop, the column loop, we get another star on the end of the column. Sorry, another star on the end of the row, so we get another column. Okay, there's the original. It's called an outer loop because it's outside the inner loop, which is inside the outer loop. So one is inside the other, nested inside the other. Okay, so let me just demonstrate that. There it is. Okay. If I run that, if I say a square of size 4, I'll get, it's not formatted particularly well, but I get 4 rows, and each row has got 4 stars in. Okay. If I ask for run it again, and ask for 10, I'll get 10 rows, and each row will have 10 stars in. There you go, 10 rows, 10 stars. Okay, we can also change that. So we don't have to make a square. We could ask the user how many rows they want, how many columns they want, and example 14 just does that. The code doesn't change hardly at all. The only difference is we've got to ask them 2 questions at the beginning, and the loop controls are going to be different in each case. So let me show you that. There's the code. So the number of rows, we ask them how many rows they want. The number of columns, we ask them how many columns. The rest of the code is pretty much the same. It's just that these two values, the range, the arguments for the range function are rows and columns. So here you can see for each row in the range of rows and each col in the range of cols, and that will give us a rectangle. So if I run that, how many rows? Let's have 3 rows and each has 10 stars in. There you go, three rows each with 10 stars. So we're using nested loops there to produce this variable sized output. Okay, as I say, it's not commonly used for that kind of thing, but it's just to demonstrate the idea of using these nested loops. I'm going to stop there, and then we'll have the last few examples to finish the lecture off.